Good morning. This is Kent Blaylock with SDG Bible Study, the SOLI DEO GLORIA Bible Study, coming to you on this Tuesday morning, February the 4th, 2025. I hope everyone is doing well. Had a great Monday and are ready for this Tuesday and getting into God's Word this morning as we continue reading from the Everyday Gospel, a daily devotional by Paul David Tripp. And we're going to be in the book of Leviticus this morning. We'll be in 3 chapters, 11, 12, and 13, and then a devotional reading from the Everyday Gospel. So I hope you'll join me as we read God's Word together. Chapter 11 of Leviticus. Yahweh spoke again to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, These are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth. Whatever divides a hoof, thus making split hoofs, and chews the cud among the animals, that you may eat. Nevertheless, you shall not eat of these among those which chew the cud, or among those which divide the hoof. The camel, for though it chews cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. Likewise, the shaphan, for though it chews cud." What is a shaphan? Before we run off there. A small, shy, furry animal found in the peninsula of the Sinai, a rock badger. Likewise, the shaphan, for though it chews cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. The rabbit also, for though it chews cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. And the pig, for though it divides the hoof, thus makes a split hoof, it does not chew cud. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. These you may eat, whatever is in the water, all that have fins and scales, those in the water. In the seas or in the rivers you may eat, but whatever is in the seas and in the river that does not have fins and scales, among all the swarming life of the water, and among all the living creatures that are in the water, they are detestable things to you, and they shall be detestable to you. You may not eat of their flesh, and their carcasses you shall detest. Whatever in the water does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. These, moreover, you shall detest among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are detestable: the eagle and the vulture and the buzzard and the kite and the falcon in its kind, every raven in its kind, and the ostrich and the owl and the gull and the hawk in its kind, and the little owl and the cormorant and the great owl, and the white owl and the pelican and the carrion vulture, and the stork, the heron in its kinds, and the hoopoe and the bat. All the swarming things that fly and that walk on all fours are detestable to you. Yet these you may eat among all the swarming things that fly and that walk on all fours, those which have above their feet jointed legs with which to jump on the earth. These of them you may eat: the locust in its kinds, and the devastating locust in its kinds, and the cricket in its kinds, and the grasshopper in its kinds. But all other swarming things that fly and that are four-footed are detestable to you. By these, moreover, you will be made unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses becomes unclean until evening. And whoever picks up any of their carcasses shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Concerning all the animals which divide the hoof, but do not make a split hoof, or which do not chew cud, they are unclean to you. Whoever touches them becomes unclean. And the one who picks up their carcasses shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. They are unclean to you. Now these are to you the unclean among the swarming things which swarm on the earth: the mole and the mouse and the great lizard in its kinds, and the gecko and the crocodile and the lizard and the sand reptile and the chameleon. These are to you the unclean among all the swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead becomes unclean until evening. Also, anything on which one of them may fall when they are dead becomes unclean, including any wooden article or clothing or a skin or a sack, any article by which work is done, it shall be put in water and be unclean until evening. Then it becomes clean. As for any earthenware vessel into which one of them may fall, whatever is in it becomes unclean, and you shall break the vessel. Any of the food which may be eaten, on which water comes, shall become unclean, and any liquid which may be drunk in every vessel shall become unclean. Everything, moreover, on which part of their carcass may fall becomes unclean. An oven or a stove shall be smashed. They are unclean and shall continue as unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern collecting water shall be clean, though the one who touches their carcass shall be unclean. And if a part of their carcass falls on any seed for sowing, which to be sown, it is clean. Though if water is put on the seed and part of the carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. Also, if one of the animals dies which you have for food, the one who touches its carcass becomes unclean until evening. He too who eats some of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And the one who picks up its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Now every swarming thing that swarms on the earth is detestable. It shall not be eaten. Whatever goes on its belly and whatever goes on all fours, whatever has many feet, in respect to every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, for they are detestable. Do not render yourselves detestable through any of the swarming things that swarm. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with them, so that you become unclean. For I am Yahweh your God. Therefore set yourselves apart as holy and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that move on the earth. For I am Yahweh who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the waters and everything that swarms on the earth, to separate between the unclean and clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten. Chapter 12. Excuse me. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, When a woman gives birth and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days. As in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. Now on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall remain in the blood of her cleansing for 33 days. She shall not touch any holy thing, and she shall not enter the sanctuary until the days of her cleansing are fulfilled. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her menstruation, and she shall remain in the blood of her cleansing for 66 days. When the days of her cleansing are fulfilled, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a sin offering. Then he shall bring it near before Yahweh and make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is a law for her who bears a child, whether a male or female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Now to chapter 13. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When a man has on the skin of his body a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priest. Then the priest shall look at the mark on the skin of the body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate him who has the infection for 7 days. Then the priest shall look at him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the infection has not changed, and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. And the priest shall look at him again on the 7th day, and if the infection has faded and the mark has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads farther on the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if the scab has spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the infection of leprosy is on a man, then he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall then look, and if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh still alive in the swelling, it is a chronic leprosy of the skin of his body. And the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. But if the leprosy breaks out farther on the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of him who has the infection from his head even to his feet, as far as a priest can see, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean. Who has infection, his all turn white, and he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. And the priest shall look at the raw flesh, and he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh turns again and is changed to white, then he shall come to the priest. And the priest shall look at him, and behold, if the infection has turned to white, then the priest shall pronounce clean him who has the infection. He is clean. When the body has a boil on its skin, and it is healed, in the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a reddish white bright spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look, and behold, if it appears to be lower than the skin, and the hair on it has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the infection of leprosy. It has broken out in the boil. But if the priest looks at it, and behold, there are no white hairs in it, and it is not lower than the skin and is faded, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And if it spreads farther on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection. But if the bright spot remains in its place and does not spread, it is only the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body sustains in its skin a burn by fire, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall look at it. And if the hair in the bright spot has turned white and appears to be deeper than the skin, it is leprosy. It has broken out in the burn. Therefore, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection of leprosy. But if the priest looks at it, and behold, there is no white hair in the bright spot, it is no deeper than the skin, but is faded, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And the priest shall look at him on the 7th day. If it spreads farther in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infection of leprosy. But if the bright spot remains in its place and has not spread in the skin, but it is faded, it is swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is only the scar of the burn. Now, if a man or woman has infection on the head or on the beard, then the priest shall look at the infection, and if it appears to be deeper than the skin, and there is thin yellowish hair in it, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scale. It is leprosy of the head or of the beard. But if the priest looks at the infection of the scale, and behold, it appears to be no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the person with the scaly infection for 7 days. Now, on the 7th day, the priest shall look at the infection, and if the scale has not spread, and there is no yellowish hair in it, and the appearance of the scale is no deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the scale. And the priest shall isolate the person with the scale 7 more days. Then on the 7th day, the priest shall look at the scale, and if the scale has not spread in the skin, and it appears to be no deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale spreads farther in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall look at him, and if the scale has spread in the skin, the priest need not look for the yellowish hair. He is unclean. If in his sight the scale has remained, however, and black hair has grown in it, the scale has healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, even white bright spots, Then the priest shall look, and if the bright spots on the skin of their bodies are faded white, it is eczema that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. Now, if a man loses his hair of his head, he is bald. He is clean. And if his head becomes bald at the front and sides, he is bald on the forehead. He is clean. But if on the bald head or the bald forehead there occurs a reddish white infection, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or on his bald forehead. Then the priest shall look at him, and if the swelling of the infection is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, like the appearance of leprosy in the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. He is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His infection is on his head. As for the leopard who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered, and he shall cover his mustache and call out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His place of habitation shall be outside the camp. When a garment has a mark of leprosy in it, whether it is a wool garment or a linen garment, whether in warp or woof, of linen or of wool, whether in leather or any article made of leather, if the mark is greenish or reddish in the garment, or in the leather, or in the warp, or in the woof, or in any article of leather, it is a leprous mark and shall be shown to the priest. Then the priest shall look at the mark and shall isolate the article with the mark for 7 days. He shall then look at the mark on the 7th day. If the mark is spread in the garment, whether in warp or in woof or in the leather, whatever the purpose for which the leather is used, the mark is a leprous malignancy. It is unclean. So he shall burn the garment, whether the warp or the woof, in wool or in linen, or in article of leather, or any article of leather in which the mark occurs, for it is a leprous malignancy. It shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest shall look, and indeed the mark has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in any article of leather, then the priest shall command them to wash the thing in which the mark occurs, and he shall isolate it for 7 more days. After the article with the mark has been washed, the priest shall again look, and if the mark has not changed its appearance, even though the mark has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire, whether an eating away has produced barrenness on the top or on the front of it. Then if the priest looks, and if the mark is faded after it has been washed, then he shall tear it out of the garment or out of the leather, whether from the warp or from the woof. And if it appears again in the garment, whether in the warp or in the woof or in any article of leather, it is an outbreak. You shall burn the article with the mark in the fire. Now the garment, whether the warp or the woof or any article of leather from which the mark has departed, when you wash it, shall then be washed a second time and will be clean. This is a law for the mark of leprosy in a garment of wool or linen, whether in warp or in woof or in any article of leather, for pronouncing it clean or unclean. That's going to conclude our reading from the biblical text. Now our reading from the devotional. By the loving miracle of God's grace, unclean hearts are made new and pure. Leviticus 13:45 and 46 says, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has a disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. These words remind me of David's prayer after committing adultery. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Psalms 51:10. Although the laws surrounding leprosy had to do with God's lovingly and wisely protecting his people from a deadly infection, they also point us to something profoundly deeper. Sin is the ultimate infection. No one escapes this disease. It renders us all unclean. It separates us all from our Maker. It cries out for the ultimate cure. one only the Messiah can provide. Like a bad stain on white linen, like a black smudge on pure vellum, like wine spilled on a new dress, like paint drips on window glass, like mud on a new shoe, this stain won't just go away. It won't fade into nothing. You won't wake up one morning to discover it has suddenly disappeared. The deepest, darkest, most penetrating, stubborn stains must be cleansed. Denying that they're there never works. Doing your best to hide them doesn't remove them. Living with them in foolishness, hoping no one will notice, is vain. Worrying about them changes nothing. Whatever has been stained must be cleansed to be new again. So it is with the human heart. It is sad to admit, but no one has a pure, perfectly clean, unstained, pristinely beautiful heart. No one. Every heart of every person comes into this world stained by sin. Sin is immorality's permanent ink, sinking into the deepest regions of the thoughts, desires, motives, purposes, worship of the heart. The tragic sin stain is humanely unremovable. The tragic sin stain is humanly unremovable. No matter what you try, no matter how many times you try, it is there to stay without something that has cleansing power. You can look at your stains with hope because there is a cleansing stream. It flows through the righteous life, the substitutionary sacrifice, the victorious resurrection of Jesus. He came so that sin-stained hearts would have the hope of being cleaned again, new again, spotless in his sight again, ultimately pure again forever. If we confess that we are stained, he is faithful. He is righteous. He will forgive our sins. He will cleanse our hearts and thoroughly wash us from all unrighteousness. Step out from the shame of your stains. Refuse to put your hope in things that do not cleanse. Walk away from a life of denial. Confess that you have no cleansing power of your own. Quit blaming your stains on other people, other things. Humbly bring the garment of your heart to him. Put your stains in his hands. He will wash you in his grace. He delights in doing for you what you could never do for yourself. He delights in making you clean. I hope you've enjoyed this reading. I know it's a difficult, lengthy reading, but it's so true in what Paul David Tripp is expressing here, that we're like the leper. Our sin is deadly, and it makes us unclean before God. That's why we need Christ. That's the beautiful thing about the gospel, that we can be clean. We do not have to yell out unclean. We can be clean because of Christ. I hope you're trusting Christ alone to deal with your unclean heart. I hope you have a blessed day today. Give God the glory that he deserves. Soli Deo Gloria.